You'll be paying for your sister's baby shower. $10,000. Isn't that wonderful? That's what my mother said, her fork poised midair, her voice sweet enough to coat the knife she'd just driven straight into me. I didn't drop my glass. I didn't gasp. I simply smiled. A small, measured smile that felt steadier than the ground under the table. If you've ever been betrayed by the people closest to you, this story will stay with you. Don't look away, because every detail leads to a shocking moment you won't forget. Because I already knew something they didn't. It was a Friday evening, 7 o'clock sharp, and the restaurant was crowded enough that their voices carried. The glow from the brass wall sconces caught the shine of their wine glasses, and the smell of roasted garlic bread clung to the air like a net. My sister leaned back in her chair, resting her hand on her round belly, watching me with a grin that said she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "You'll love it," my father added, reaching for his glass. "It'll be your gift to the family. Everyone will see how generous you are." My throat burned. Generous. That word. It was a mask they loved to shove onto me when what they really meant was obedient, convenient, disposable. I stirred my iced tea with the straw, letting the clink of ice cover the silence I gave them. Silence unsettles people. I learned that years ago. The waiter came by with a fresh basket of bread, and I noticed the way my mother tilted her menu toward him, as if she wanted him to overhear. As if she needed an audience. $10,000, she said again, louder this time. And she's handling all the planning. Isn't that a blessing? The poor boy nearly stumbled, muttered congratulations, and hurried away. That's when I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about power. It was about control. I took a small bite of bread, chewing slowly while my sister chimed in. "Oh, and Mom already posted about it online," she said, pulling her phone from her purse. "We've got hundreds of likes already. Everyone's talking about how amazing you are." My hands froze in my lap, napkin clenched between my fingers. They'd announced it before even asking me. They'd locked the chains in place and thrown the key into the crowd of onlookers. So I didn't argue. I smiled. "Is that so?" I asked softly, letting my voice drift like smoke over the table. Inside my chest tightened. I was 68 years old, and I'd spent most of those years swallowing pride and calling it patience. But tonight something shifted. Maybe it was the way the candlelight exaggerated every wrinkle in my mother's smirk. Maybe it was the way my father leaned back as if my savings were his chair to rest upon. Or maybe it was the quiet secret I carried, the one I'd never spoken aloud. They thought I was alone. Helpless. Dependent. They didn't know what I had tucked away, hidden from every greedy eye. The waiter returned to take our orders. My father ordered steak medium rare. My mother asked for salmon with dill sauce. My sister wanted pasta with cream. I simply said, "The same as hers." The waiter looked at me for confirmation, and I smiled again. "Salmon, please." "Thank you." Because I already knew the flavor I wanted to remember tonight by. "Don't look so shocked," my mother teased when the waiter left. "It's not as if you have anything else to spend it on. You've lived a simple life, dear. You've saved plenty." Her words pressed against me like a knife on skin, gentle, yet dangerous if I moved the wrong way. "I suppose so," I said, folding my napkin across my lap. My sister laughed, tossing her hair. "Think of it this way. You'll finally be part of something important." Important. I nearly choked on the word. Across the room a baby cried. The sound threaded into my ribs, sharp and unrelenting. Mothers shushed their children, forks clinked, glasses touched. Life went on around me while mine was being handed away like an old checkbook. But no one saw the way I curled my toes inside my shoes, pressing into the floor to keep myself grounded. No one saw the calm mask I wore, a mask I'd perfected through decades of their little betrayals. No one saw the storm they had just invited in. The conversation drifted to party details. My mother described decorations in pastel colors, my father suggested hiring a band, and my sister spoke of gifts she expected. I nodded, adding a word here or there just enough to keep them from seeing the truth behind my eyes. At one point my mother leaned forward, her pearls catching the light. "You'll be proud, darling. Everyone will remember this day." "Oh, I'm certain they will," I said. The food arrived, plates steaming, sauce glistening under the dim lights. I picked up my fork, sliced a neat piece of salmon and lifted it slowly. My mother was still talking. My father still boasting. My sister still glowing with undeserved pride. I chewed, swallowed, and listened. Not to them but to myself. To the steady rhythm of my own breathing, the quiet reminder that I wasn't trapped. Not anymore. A small subplot unfolded right there at the next table. A couple argued in hushed tones, the man waving his hands, the woman staring into her glass as if she'd heard it all before. I caught her eye for a brief second, and she looked at me with the kind of tired recognition only women of our age understand. I lifted my glass to her ever so slightly, a silent toast. She didn't smile but she nodded. We both knew. We both knew the taste of being taken for granted. Are you even listening? My sister snapped, her voice cutting through my thoughts. Yes, I said calmly, dabbing my lips with the napkin. I hear everything. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious for the first time. Good. Let her squirm. My father chuckled. Don't take it so seriously. We're just making memories. Yes, I said again. Memories. The meal dragged on, each bite heavier than the last. My mother complained about the service, my father bragged about old business deals, my sister took photos of her pasta. And I sat there, silent but alert, cataloging every word, every smirk, every drop of arrogance that spilled across the table. I tapped my fingers lightly against the stem of my glass, a rhythm only I understood. A rhythm that said, not tonight. Not this time. When dessert menus came, I excused myself. I'll just step away for a moment. In the mirror of the restroom, the fluorescent lights were harsher than the candlelight, showing every line, every crease, every scar time had carved into me. I leaned closer, whispering to my reflection, they don't know who they're dealing with. And I meant it. Back at the table, the check arrived. My father pushed it toward me, a careless gesture. Get this one, dear, he said. It's only fair. I placed my hand on the leather folder but didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I looked at each of them one by one, letting the silence stretch until even my mother shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I smiled again. You'll regret this, I said quietly. Their laughter filled the restaurant, high and sharp. But underneath, unease stirred. I saw it in the way my sister's hand paused on her fork. In the way my father's eyes flickered to mine and quickly away. And in the way my mother's smile tightened just slightly. I leaned back, folded my hands and waited. Because the night was not over. Not by a long shot. So when my mother dabbed her lips with her napkin and said, I knew you'd understand, I gave her the calmest nod I could manage. That single gesture lit up her face like she'd won a battle she hadn't even fought. My father raised his glass in a small toast. My sister smirked as if she'd just been crowned. Let them have their moment. I had mine waiting. I didn't argue when the waiter slid the bill closer to me again. I slipped my card inside and handed it back without a word. The look of satisfaction on my father's face was almost worth the price. Almost. Inside though, my chest felt like stone. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I forced my breathing to stay even. Years of practice had made me good at playing the part they expected. The dutiful daughter. The reliable one. The woman who never said no. The irony was, I'd learned that agreeing too quickly unsettled them nearly as much as silence did. And I intended to use both. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications before I even had my coffee. Photos from the dinner were all over my sister's social media. Blessed with the most generous sister. She's making my dream shower come true. $10,000, all out of love. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments. Neighbors, old school friends, even distant relatives chiming in about how lucky my sister was, how kind I was, how perfect my parents must be to raise such daughters. I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes blurred. Then I set it down, poured my coffee and let the bitterness settle on my tongue. They had written the story for me and now the world believed it. That afternoon I walked to the party supply shop on Main Street. The air smelled of plastic and cinnamon, a strange mix from the shelves of balloons and the bakery next door. A young clerk in a red apron hurried over, chirping about discounts on bulk streamers. I let her talk while my eyes scanned the rows of pastel plates, ribbons and centerpieces. My fingers trailed over smooth plastic packaging, the faint crinkle under my hand grounding me in the moment. I'll be back, I said finally, smiling as I picked up a brochure and tucked it into my bag. But I didn't return. Over the next week I visited 3 bakeries, 2 florists and a rental hall. I nodded politely, collected business cards, and took notes in a small spiral notebook I carried everywhere. Anyone watching me would think I was planning with precision. And in a way I was. Each "yes, that's perfect," each "I'll be in touch," was a brick in the careful wall I was building. Not a plan for their party. No, something much more satisfying. One morning, I ran into Mrs. Kendall from across the street as I was coming back from the florist. She was out walking her dog, a scruffy terrier that barked at everything. "I saw the news," she said cheerfully, tugging the leash as the dog sniffed my shoes. "You're such a blessing to your sister. Spending all that money, not everyone would do that." I pressed my lips into a polite smile. "Family comes first," I replied, the words tasting like chalk. Her eyes softened. "Well, you've always been the strong one. God knows not many people notice the quiet sacrifices." Her voice lingered with me long after she walked away. Quiet sacrifices. That's what they called it. That's what they expected. Not anymore. At home, I opened a shoebox I kept on the top shelf of my closet. Inside were envelopes of receipts, old photographs, and letters. Proof of a lifetime of being overlooked, dismissed, used. One slip of paper stood out. A bank statement folded and worn from years of checking and rechecking. My little hidden advantage. My insurance. I tucked it back under the pile. Not yet. That evening my mother called. "Darling, we've decided on the theme," she said briskly. "Yellow and green, very spring. You'll need to order tablecloths and chair covers. Oh, and don't forget the invitations, we want them to go out next week." I held the phone between my ear and shoulder while I watered the plants on my windowsill. The soil smelled rich and damp, my hands steady as I tipped the can. "Of course," I said. "Leave it to me." Her sigh of satisfaction was audible even over the crackle of the line. "I knew you'd do the right thing." When we hung up, I placed the watering can down carefully and wiped my hands. My right thing and her right thing had never been the same. The following Sunday, my sister invited me to her house to go over plans. Her living room smelled faintly of baby powder already, though the child wasn't even born yet. She spread magazines and printouts across the coffee table, her excitement bubbling over. "I want this cake. See the little fondant booties on top? And we need at least 3 photographers. Mom says people expect good photos these days." I nodded, making notes in my spiral notebook. "And the favors," she continued. "Maybe custom candles? Or little bottles of lotion with labels that say, 'From Baby with Love.' Isn't that adorable?" "Yes," I said, jotting it down. Her eyes sparkled as she leaned closer. "You're not going to back out, are you?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The smugness, the entitlement, the absolute belief that I was nothing more than her provider. "No," I said softly. "I won't back out." She beamed, satisfied. Driving home that night, the streetlights cast long shadows on the road. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, my knuckles pale under the dim glow. Her words replayed in my mind. "You're not going to back out, are you?" "No." "Not back out. Step forward." Over the next days, I let them believe I was falling into place. I answered calls with cheerful agreement. I sent text updates with fake progress. Florist confirmed. Cake order placed. Invitations ready. Each lie was a thread weaving a tapestry they never questioned. Because dutiful daughters don't lie. Dutiful daughters deliver. And they had no idea that every step forward was leading them somewhere they didn't want to go. One evening, my father stopped by unannounced. He carried a folder of old photographs, smiling as he handed them to me. "For the slideshow at the shower," he said. "You'll handle that, won't you?" I flipped through the pictures. My sister as a toddler, my parents in their youth, family vacations where I was always off to the side, half cut from the frame. "Yes," I said, sliding the folder onto the table. "I'll handle it." When he left, I sat alone in the quiet, staring at the faces that had never really seen me. And I whispered to myself, "Not anymore." By the end of the week, they were praising me to everyone. My mother boasted at church. My father bragged to his old poker friends. My sister posted updates daily. "She's an angel. She's a blessing. She's making it all happen." And I smiled when people repeated it to me in the grocery store, at the pharmacy, on the sidewalk. Yes, I was making it happen. Just not the way they thought. When the phone rang late one night, I let it go to voicemail. My mother's voice, clipped and commanding, filled the room. "Remember, dear, the deposit is due next week. Don't be late. We don't want any embarrassment." Embarrassment. The word curled in my chest like a spark catching tinder. No, I thought. We certainly don't. I sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, pen tapping. Around me, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Line by line, I listed every detail they expected. Venue. Food. Music. Decorations. And beside each, I wrote one word. Done. Not a lie. Not the truth. Just enough to keep them blind. When I finally closed the notebook, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I wasn't just reacting to their demands. I was directing. And the best part? They had no idea. That night, as I lay in bed, the glow from the street lamps spilling across the ceiling, I let myself smile. A real smile, small but sharp. Because I was still playing the dutiful daughter. But this time it was my game. And I was going to win. That thought carried me straight through the following week until the morning of the shower finally arrived. The sky was pale gray, the kind that promised rain but held it back just long enough to make people uneasy. I slipped on my shoes, adjusted my jacket, and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had been ambushed at that dinner table. My shoulders were straighter, my eyes sharper. For once, I wasn't just surviving their plans. I was steering them. The hall buzzed when I arrived. Cars lined the street, neighbors and relatives pouring inside with wrapped gifts and cheerful chatter. The smell of perfume and pastry filled the air, and I could hear music pulsing faintly from within. I walked through the doors slowly, letting the scene wash over me. Pastel balloons floated against the ceiling, ribbons trailed across long tables, and a large banner read, "Welcome, baby." My sister stood near the front, her face lit with a practiced smile as she greeted each guest like royalty. And everywhere whispers followed me. There she is. Such a generous sister. Can you believe she paid for all this? I let their words roll over me like water on stone. Let them believe it. My mother spotted me first. She bustled over, her pearls gleaming, her perfume too strong, and hugged me in front of half the crowd. Perfect timing, she whispered against my ear, her tone sugar-coated but sharp underneath. Now make sure everything goes smoothly. I patted her shoulder, smiling at the guests who watched. Of course, I said, keeping my voice steady. Inside I felt my pulse quicken. Not with nerves. With anticipation. I moved through the hall slowly, stopping to greet old family friends. Mrs. Howard asked about my garden. Mr. Green told me he'd prayed for me. A cousin I hadn't seen in years commented on how calm I looked. Calm. That was the word they kept using. They had no idea that calm wasn't what I felt. It was control. As I passed the dessert table, I noticed the cake. White frosting, pastel flowers, and tiny fondant shoes perched on top, just like my sister had demanded. Guests snapped photos praising how perfect it looked. Perfect on the outside. That was the theme of the day. My father held court at one of the tables, telling stories too loudly, waving his hands like a politician. When he saw me, he lifted his glass. "There's my girl," he announced. "The woman who made this all possible." Applause rippled across the room. My cheeks warmed, though not with pride. I dipped my head, offering a small wave as if their gratitude meant something to me. Inside I wanted to laugh. They were thanking me for building their pedestal, not realizing I'd already set fire to the foundation. A small subplot unfolded near the punch bowl. A pair of teenagers, likely my sister's younger cousins, whispered while sneaking extra cookies into their napkins. One dropped a crumb on the floor and the other elbowed her, both stifling laughter. It reminded me of myself at that age, stealing crumbs where no one noticed, always on the edges. The thought tightened my chest for a moment, then released. I wasn't the girl on the edge anymore. My sister finally approached me, her hand resting dramatically on her stomach. "You did all this," she said, sweeping her arm toward the decorations. "It's exactly what I wanted." She was glowing, soaking in every compliment. For a moment I almost wondered if she truly believed it. If she truly thought I had bent myself into shape just to make her dream day come true. "Yes," I said softly. "It's exactly what you wanted." Her smile widened, but I noticed the flicker in her eyes. Suspicion. Doubt. Maybe she heard something in my tone. Maybe she sensed it. Good. The program began. My mother clapped her hands, calling everyone to sit. My father gave a speech about family unity, about blessings, about sacrifices made for one another. He paused for dramatic effect, looking straight at me as if I were the shining example. The room applauded again. My sister dabbed her eyes, pretending to cry. Me. I sat still, folding my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes. I let them believe I was the quiet hero of the day. But inside, every word my father spoke was another spark tossed onto the pile I'd been building. As gifts were opened, I moved among the tables, refilling drinks, adjusting chairs, offering napkins. Guests praised me for being so attentive, so thoughtful. Yes, I said, smiling. Anything for family. The words were honey in my mouth, but sharp in my throat. Each thank you, each nod of admiration only deepened the quiet storm inside me. They thought they saw me, the dutiful daughter, the giving sister. But they hadn't seen me at all. During the lull between speeches and games, I stepped outside for air. The cool breeze carried the smell of damp earth and faint traffic from the street. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and let the quiet seep into me. Behind me, laughter and music spilled from the open door. I thought of Mrs. Kendall's words. Quiet sacrifices. And I thought, not anymore. When I returned, the games were underway. Guests passed around string to guess my sister's belly size. Laughter erupted as measurements were too long or too short. My mother floated between tables, clapping and squealing. I slipped into the background, observing. I watched how easily they laughed, how carelessly they celebrated on my dime. They didn't even question it. And why would they? I had trained them too well. At one table, two women I barely knew whispered about me. She's remarkable, one said. Sacrificed everything, the other replied. Not everyone would do that. Their words struck me harder than I expected. Sacrificed. That was the story they'd written for me without ever asking if I wanted it. I turned away before they could see the heat in my eyes. By late afternoon, the room grew louder. Music picked up, drinks flowed, laughter spilled out in waves. My sister posed for more photos, her hands framing her stomach like a trophy. My parents basked in the glow of admiration, the center of a crowd that believed every word they said. Me. I drifted through it all, quiet but watchful. Every compliment, every glance, every assumption stacked higher and higher. They thought they'd won. But the day wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment that stayed with me happened near the end. A small girl, no older than 7, tugged at my sleeve. Her eyes were wide, her dress wrinkled from play. Are you happy? She asked. I froze. Of all the questions, of all the things people could have said, that one pierced deepest. I crouched to her level, searching her innocent face. Yes, I said softly. I'm very happy. But my voice cracked on the last word. She smiled, satisfied, and ran off to play. And I stood there, heart pounding, realizing she had seen through more of me in 1 second than my family had in a lifetime. The cake was brought out, candles lit, and applause roared. My sister cut the first slice, handing it to my mother, who cooed over how perfect it was. The guests clapped. Cameras flashed. I clapped too, my hands steady, my smile fixed. But inside I whispered, perfect, yes. Perfect for today. As the plates were passed, I rose quietly and slipped toward the back of the hall. The chatter dimmed behind me, the cool air of the storage corridor wrapping around me like a cloak. I paused, listening to the muffled laughter echo through the walls. Then I straightened my jacket, exhaled slowly, and whispered to myself, now we wait. And I stepped back into the hall, calm, composed, and invisible in plain sight. The day of celebration was theirs. But the night? The night was mine. I whispered it as I stepped back into the hall, smoothing the sleeve of my jacket, blending into the chatter and the clatter of forks against plates. My sister's laughter rang out near the cake table, high and bright, cutting through the air like a bell. For a moment I stood still, letting the sound of it settle deep in my chest. That laugh had always been my cue, the sound of her victory, the sound of me disappearing. Not tonight. I circled the room slowly, offering smiles, nodding at guests who waved. The music had softened into something lighter, almost lullaby-like, but the air carried a charge. People were full, talkative, their voices rising in crescendos of excitement. I noticed the flush on their cheeks, the slight restlessness in their movements. It was starting. At the center table, my father raised his glass again, preparing for yet another toast. He cleared his throat, his cheeks red from wine and pride. To family, he boomed, nearly spilling his drink. To sacrifice and love, the things that bind us together. Applause followed, though less enthusiastic than before. I caught sight of one woman dabbing her forehead with a napkin, her face pinched. Another man shifted uncomfortably in his chair, rubbing at his stomach. I folded my arms loosely, my expression unreadable. My mother glided across the room, ever the hostess, though even she seemed distracted. She leaned over one guest, whispering something, then frowned when the woman shook her head and reached for water. "Are you all right?" I heard my mother ask. The guest nodded quickly, forcing a smile. But I noticed everything. The first real crack appeared 10 minutes later. A young cousin excused herself abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. She hurried toward the back hallway, clutching her middle, her face pale. Guests exchanged glances, some laughing nervously. My father chuckled. "Too much cake, I suppose," he said, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. I took another sip of water, watching silently as the ripples began to spread. At the punch bowl, two women whispered, their voices sharp. "I don't feel right," one muttered. "Me neither," the other replied, pressing a hand to her chest. "Maybe the food." Their words trailed off when they saw me nearby. I smiled gently, tilting my head as if concerned. They looked away quickly, embarrassed. Inside, my pulse stayed steady. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Laughter turned brittle, conversations faltered. A guest stumbled against a chair, muttering apologies. Another pressed both hands against the table, knuckles white as sweat gathered on his brow. The music suddenly seemed too loud, the lights too bright. And still my family didn't see it. My sister was busy posing for photographs, her smile stretched thin but determined. She waved her hands as if commanding attention, her voice louder than the rest. "Don't forget the gifts. We have more to open." She clung to the spotlight, blind to the shadows gathering around her. I watched her carefully, my expression calm. Then came the sound that cut through everything, the sharp clatter of glass breaking against the floor. A guest had dropped his drink, his hand shaking as he doubled over. Gasps rippled through the hall. Chairs scraped, voices rose, and the atmosphere shifted from unease to chaos in a single breath. My mother's face drained of color. She rushed forward, calling out, "Someone help him." But help was in short supply. All around, more guests were shifting, groaning, standing and stumbling toward the exits. The celebration unraveled before my eyes, like fabric tearing down the middle. And still I stood steady. My father turned toward me then, his eyes wide for the first time all day. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice low, urgent. I tilted my head, meeting his gaze. "It seems the party isn't agreeing with everyone." His jaw tightened, his face blotchy with anger and fear. He opened his mouth to speak again, but another cry cut him off. Across the room, my sister had dropped into a chair, clutching her stomach, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. I walked toward her slowly, each step measured, the sound of my heels tapping against the floor steady in the rising chaos. She looked up at me, her face contorted. "Do something," she hissed, panic cracking her voice. "Fix this." I crouched beside her, close enough so only she could hear. The air smelled of frosting and sweat, the sickly mix of sweetness and sickness. "I told you," I whispered, my lips barely moving. "You'll regret this." Her eyes widened, searching mine for a hint of mercy. She found none. Around us, the hall had dissolved into pandemonium. Guests rushed toward the doors, tripping over chairs, knocking over decorations. The perfect banner sagged as someone brushed against it, tearing one corner loose. My mother clung to my father's arm, her voice shrill. "Do something. Call someone." He barked orders at no one in particular, his authority slipping with every passing second. I stood slowly, straightening my jacket. My sister's sobs filled the space behind me, muffled by the chaos. Near the dessert table, I noticed Mrs. Howard from church, the same woman who had once told me I was so dependable. She looked at me now, her face pale, eyes searching. For a moment I thought she knew. But she only shook her head weakly and stumbled toward the exit. Dependable. Yes. But not in the way they thought. The band had stopped playing, their instruments abandoned. One of the musicians argued with my father, gesturing toward the door. My father waved him off, shouting something about staying put, but his voice cracked. No one was listening anymore. The hall that had once buzzed with celebration now throbbed with panic, voices overlapping, footsteps pounding. And still I was calm. I crossed to the back of the room where the air was cooler. From there I could see everything. My parents' frantic gestures, my sister's crumpled figure, the guests pouring out into the street. It was like watching a storm sweep through, tearing apart everything they had built on my back. And I felt nothing but clarity. My mother spotted me then. Her hair was out of place, her pearl necklace slightly askew. She rushed over, her hands trembling. "You have to help," she cried, gripping my arm. "People will talk. This can't be happening." I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then up into her panicked eyes. "People will talk," I echoed softly. "Yes, they will." Her grip loosened as if she'd touched fire. My father came next, his voice low, almost a growl. "What did you do?" For a moment I considered answering. But I only smiled. A small, measured smile, the same one I had worn at that dinner weeks ago. He flinched, as though the silence itself was an answer. The room was nearly empty now, save for a few stragglers gathering belongings, muttering under their breath. The decorations sagged, the cake sat half-eaten, abandoned. The air stank of sweat and tension, a far cry from the sweet anticipation that had filled it hours before. My sister moaned softly behind me, her voice breaking. "Why?" I turned slightly, just enough to meet her gaze across the wreckage. "Because you asked for it," I said simply. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in that hall. I didn't feel like the background character in someone else's story. I felt seen. Not by their approval. Not by their applause. But by their silence. And as I stood there, steady amid the ruin, I knew the tables had turned. And they would never turn back again. I stood there, steady amid the ruin, my family's voices tangled in panic and confusion. The hall smelled of frosting gone sour under hot lights, of spilled punch soaking into the carpet. The once perfect decorations hung limp, sagging like the pride that had propped them up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking. I was towering, though I hadn't moved an inch. My mother's voice cracked as she pleaded with guests to stay, but they streamed out the door without looking back. My father barked orders, waving his arms, but no one listened anymore. My sister slumped in her chair, makeup streaked, clutching her belly with both hands like a shield. The power they had once held, the spotlight they had stolen, all of it had crumbled in less than an hour. And I had been the one to light the match. I turned and walked toward the exit, my shoes tapping against the floor, each sound sharp in the thick silence that followed me. "Where are you going?" my father shouted, his voice trembling. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. His face was blotchy, his hands shaking, his voice desperate in a way I had never heard before. "Home," I said simply. It was the most honest word I had spoken in years. But my mother rushed toward me, her pearls swinging wildly against her neck. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "You can't just leave," she cried. "What will people say? They'll blame us." Her grip tightened, but I stayed still. Slowly, I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. The same hand that had directed, commanded, and corrected me for decades. "They should," I said quietly, lifting my gaze back to hers. "They should blame you." Her mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. I pulled free and walked into the cool night air. The sky had finally broken, light rain falling in soft drops that speckled my jacket. The street was lined with cars, their headlights cutting through the mist as guests hurried away, shaking their heads, muttering under their breath. I kept walking, letting the rain wash the noise of the hall from my skin. At the curb, I spotted Mrs. Howard from church, holding her husband's arm. She paused when she saw me. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to speak, her lips parting, her eyes full of questions. But then she only nodded once, slowly, and turned away. That nod was enough. She had seen. She understood more than she would ever say aloud. I reached my car, the metal cool under my hand as I opened the door. The air inside smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet I kept tucked under the seat. Familiar, calming. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and sat there as the rain streaked the windshield. Behind me, the hall's lights glowed through the mist, still buzzing faintly with the chaos I had left behind. And I realized with a sharp clarity that I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The shoebox at home came to mind. The bank statement, the proof of the life I had carved for myself in secret, the life they had always assumed didn't exist. For years I had been the dependable one, the one with nothing else to spend it on. They had no idea that I had saved, planned, and prepared. They had no idea I had the power all along. And tonight I had finally used it. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. My sister's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. Then my father's name appeared. Then my mother's. One after the other, as if they thought their voices still carried weight. I pressed the button and turned the phone off. The silence was sweeter than any apology they could ever stammer out. The drive home felt different. The streets I had traveled thousands of times seemed wider, freer. The streetlights shimmered in the rain, casting long silver streaks across the pavement. The wipers swished in a steady rhythm, like a drumbeat to my new beginning. I wasn't hurrying. I wasn't dreading. I wasn't replaying their words in my head. For once I was only here in this moment, steering myself forward. When I pulled into my driveway, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The garden smelled rich and earthy, the flowers bent under the weight of droplets. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, feeling the damp air fill my lungs. This was my home. My space. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and was greeted by the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the familiar creak of the floorboard by the entryway. It felt like sanctuary. I set my wet jacket over the chair, turned on the lamp, and pulled out the shoebox once more. Inside I found the envelope with the bank statement, the one I had guarded like treasure. I unfolded it carefully, running my fingers over the numbers, the proof that I had more than enough tucked away to live the rest of my years on my own terms. They had thought $10,000 would break me. They didn't know it was only a fraction of what I had built quietly, piece by piece, while they wasted theirs. For decades I had played the role they assigned me. The dependable daughter. The background character. The one who paid the bills, made the calls, carried the weight without complaint. But tonight I had rewritten the script. Tonight I had shown them what it meant to underestimate me. I slid the statement back into the box, closed the lid, and placed it gently on the shelf. My hands no longer trembled as they once had. Instead they felt steady, certain. I made tea, the kettle whistling softly as steam rose into the kitchen air. The scent of chamomile wrapped around me, warm and soothing. I carried the cup to the window and sat at the table, looking out at the rain. For the first time in years I didn't feel the weight of expectation pressing down. I didn't feel the sting of being overlooked. I felt free. Somewhere across town my parents were scrambling to explain, my sister was crying, the guests were gossiping. Their perfect image had shattered, and no amount of spin could put it back together. Me. I was here in my quiet kitchen sipping tea, alive in a way I hadn't been in decades. I thought of that little girl at the party, the one who had asked, "Are you happy?" I hadn't been able to answer her truthfully then. But now, in the stillness of my home with the storm behind me, I whispered aloud, "Yes. Yes, I am." The clock ticked softly on the wall. The tea cooled in my hands. And with every passing second, the distance between who I had been and who I had become stretched wider, sharper, irreversible. I was no longer their scapegoat. No longer their silent servant. I was myself, and that was enough. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, and turned off the light. As I climbed the stairs, the house around me felt different. Not bigger, not brighter, but wholly mine. At the top I paused, looking back down into the dimly lit kitchen, the chair with my jacket still draped over it, the shoebox tucked safely on the shelf. A small smile curved my lips. Because I knew I had walked away not just from that hall, but from a lifetime of chains. And I wasn't going back. If this story struck a chord with you, you're not alone. Subscribe now for more powerful revenge and betrayal stories. Stories that remind us we're stronger than those who try to break us.